Hello, my name is Gretchen, and this is Cover Art, a series where I discuss a video game I'm currently playing while doing my makeup at the same time. If you're interested in any of the tools that I'm using, I'll go ahead and leave that all in the description below. Otherwise, I'm going to hop right into it. So today I actually wanted to tell you about a game series, not just one game, several games in a series. The series is called The Legend of Heroes: Trails in the Sky. It is a JRPG that was developed by Falcom. They actually started it in 2004 for the first chapter of the game. And they initially had released it for the PC, but then a couple years later released it for the PSP. And then it got a couple more releases on Steam, the Vita, what have you. Now the game actually didn't even come to the US until 2011. And that is because of translation and localization. There is so much text in the game, it just took them that long to port it over for English speakers. So Trails in the Sky opens to a young girl home alone. She's wondering when her dad is going to get back from, his business travels. As she's kind of talking to herself, her dad does arrive back home, and lo and behold, he has an injured boy with him. The little girl is very saucy and is like, is this an illegitimate child that you've brought home? And her father is like, where did you even learn that word? So you can already tell this little girl is very outspoken. The young boy wakes up about the same age as the girl. He is very irritated. He's like, why did you bring me here? You should have just left me to die, etc., etc. And the little girl, whose name is Estelle, immediately butts in and is like, I thought you were supposed to be injured. That is no way for an injured person to talk. You need to rest. So this dialogue goes back and forth for a little while, and it is decided that this boy is going to be staying with them for a while. So flash forward, I think about 5 years. They are both 16. Estelle Bright wakes up and is now going to go down to meet her father and Joshua, the boy who's still living with them. And they are completing their final days of bracer training. Now, bracers are this kind of international, non-government affiliated organization in the world that their sole purpose is to help citizens. They just help civilians with whatever kind of tasks are needed. They're all over the continent of Zemuria, which is where the game is located, and where several other games will take place later on, because it's not just these first 3 games in Trails in the Sky. It's The Legend of Heroes, Trails in the Sky, first chapter, second chapter, and the third. And then you have a group of games known as the Crossbell Arc, or the Crossbell games, that take place in Zemuria but in a different country or city-state, actually, in that one. And then you have the probably more popular titles for people in North America, which is The Legend of Heroes: Trails of Cold Steel. The Crossbell games are known as Trails to Azure and Trails to Zero. There's only 2 games in that arc, and then there's 4 games in Trails of Cold Steel. But I digress, because there's a lot going on in these games, let me tell you. I mean, obviously there's like 8 games out now. More than that, I think. So, back to Estelle and Joshua. They are finishing up, they're taking their final test for bracer training. Their Cassius Bright, Estelle's father, is a bracer. That's all pretty much Estelle's ever wanted to be, is a bracer. She is very spunky and bright and excited and ready to go and ready to fight things. Not so much ready to take tests and things like that. So she's just glad to be almost through with the training so she can keep on and become a full-fledged junior bracer. So after finishing their tests with one of the other main characters that you're going to meet throughout the game, Skara, as I'll call her for now because her full name kind of intimidates me. I think it's like Scarazard. I'm not really sure. I don't know how to pronounce it, but she's a recurring character and you'll see her frequently throughout the game. They finish taking their test with her. They pass. They're full-fledged junior bracers now, and they are able to take quests for the guild. Now, a lot of these quests are going to be like errands, like, oh, I've lost my cat, help me find it, or like, There's a monster on the highway that is terrorizing civilians and citizens. Please go take care of it by, killing it. Things as straightforward as that, or even just like, I need you to go find X, Y, and Z for me and bring it back because I lost it, or I need it for something or another, what have you. So Cassius says that one of the traditions of becoming a bracer is traveling the country that you are going to protect on foot. So that is what Estelle and Joshua set out to do once they finished their time in their hometown of Roland. I think that's where they're from. I could be wrong. They live in a kingdom known as Liberal. Liberal? I think it's Liberal, like a hard I. I'm not entirely sure. Anyways, that's where they're from. It's a small country in the southern part of Zamoria. And so they do a couple of quests in their hometown, kind of get started and situated, start to learn a little bit about the characters that they are and what they're like, and then they eventually saunter off to visit the rest of the country. Along their way, they're joined by other bracers and characters that will intermittently join them in their travels and journeys. A lot of first chapter is introductions, world building. There was so much text that it took them, 7 years to port it over to America, so it's a lot to go through. But if you know me and you've seen my videos by now, you know that I am huge on story and characters and world building and lore. Oh my gosh, I love lore in video games, and this game has it. Abound. So as Estelle and Joshua are traveling, they are also not just seeing the specific region's problems and issues and helping resolve those, they're also starting to see this bigger picture of troubles happening in the kingdom, both politically and, due to outsider influence. And one of the influences is the Erebonian government, which is a country to the north, and they are more of an empire, really, like imperialistic, taking over smaller city-states and countries and integrating them into Erebonia. And there's also the murmurings of this secret organization that is called Ouroboros that's also influencing things that are going on in Liberal. So you've got these two junior bracers traveling the country. They're visiting different cities and helping resolve more immediate problems, but kind of have this overarching issue going on just in general. So where first chapter focuses a lot on focuses a lot on character building, world building, story, introduction to things. Second chapter is the nitty-gritty of it. They've resolved the immediate issues of Liberal, and now there is much heavier stuff afoot, like a bigger plot that is being perpetrated by the seemingly nefarious group Ouroboros. For reasons that I won't go into because, spoilers, Estelle is now traveling alone in second chapter. Joshua is not with her, and she is still joined intermittently by people, but she is basically trying to reunite with Joshua, as well as figure out what Ouroboros is up to, what their goals are, why they're interfering so heavily in Liberal, and like what their end goal is, because they're very mysterious. They kind of just pop in. She starts to meet some of the people in Ouroboros known as enforcers. It's this weird thing that you'll keep hearing in the game, that Ouroboros' enforcers are kind of just like allowed to do whatever they want. They don't have to necessarily be working constantly for Ouroboros. They just kind of carry out missions for them every now and then. But there are several within the organization. You'll start to meet them and come into conflict with them. A lot of the bracers that you will come across and help will also have certain relationships with members of Ouroboros and their enforcers. It's a whole thing. There's a lot of bracers that you get to know, and a lot of backstory that is kind of unfolding in second chapter, and just like a lot of conflict between characters, between what's going on in the nation and with what Ouroboros is doing. Now, I will say A big part of the reason why in first chapter Estelle and Joshua do go to, travel around the city is at one point, pretty early on in the game, so this isn't too much of a spoiler. Cassius is called away on a mission that he can't really talk to them about, but he's like, yeah, I gotta go away for work. Go ahead and, do your duty as bracers, get to know the area, go travel around, etc., etc. They're like, cool, okay, bye dad, thanks for your help or whatever. And Estelle the whole time just kind of assumes that Cassius is actually just kind of like a slacker, because it's her dad. She doesn't really know that much of his involvement in the Bracer Guild, only that he is a bracer, that he goes and does work for them. But that's her dad. That's pretty much the extent of her knowledge. And through her journeys, she finds out that her dad was actually like amazing, is actually amazing, and is just like, has done all of these achievements. He's respected not only in Liberal, but like in other countries as well. And she's just like, what is happening? I didn't know my dad was like hot shit around here. He's just like, my dad. But she finds out that he's kind of amazing and kind of a hero. He also was in the army for a while for Liberal, but retired to become a bracer after a specific war took place and after he lost his wife, Estelle's mother, as a result of the war. He stopped being an army general and went to bracerhood. But in first chapter, as they're doing their rounds, they quickly find out that Cassius was bound for an airship that was actually taken over by sky bandits. And he's missing, and no one's heard from him. Which is kind of like concerning, but at the same time, Estelle's like, well, he's probably fine. She just doesn't know her dad is some amazing hero, but also is like, he's fine. We'll keep an eye out for him. We'll look around for him. I think she gets a little bit more worried than she lets on, from what I remember in first chapter, but all in all, she's like, okay, let's just keep an eye out for him and find him. Because when they rescue the airship from these sky bandits, they don't see him on there. He's not present on the ship. They have no idea where he is, so they just figure, well, we'll continue doing what we're doing and maybe we'll eventually come across him. So yeah, you find out that, Cassius is actually hot shit. He is well respected in their community, in their kingdom, and in neighboring countries, and you also find out that the reason that Estelle's mother passed away during the war is actually because Estelle had gone out to play at a tower. She was outside in their home city, and this was when she was very young. I want to say like 4 or 5. And an airstrike was coming through. Well, I think it was that like something accidentally dropped on their city and was going to land right on Estelle in that tower, but her mother came in and kind of like protected her from the debris and from the crashed tower. And you later find out that, she does not survive that collapse on her, as most people wouldn't. And then you also find out that the airstrike, which, had that error, was initially ordered by Cassius Bright. So both he and Estelle, I think deep down, have a feeling of guilt for the loss of, wife and mother, which, makes sense. But that is a huge factor into what made Cassius leave the military and join the Bracer Guild. Because again, the Bracer Guild is not affiliated with any government. It's all over the continent, and their whole thing is just protect civilians, help them out, escort them where they need to go, make sure that they're taken care of and not being abused or whatever, and then help cities with monster exterminations and things of that sort to, again, further help protect civilians. There is a point made in first chapter that'll kind of come up again in later games where they talk about how they're allowed to arrest people to a certain extent, but once it becomes too political, bracers actually don't have the power that a city's government would have as far as arresting people. So there's this caveat to like, well, bracers can protect people, but only to a certain extent before that nation or city's government comes into play. Oh, I'm trying to open this foundation. It's such a mess. So as far as mechanics in the game go, the fighting styles that you'll come across are both physical and magical. In The Legend of Heroes, they're kind of like magical properties are actually called orbments. There's this whole thing about the discovery of a type of technology that they refer to as orbal technology. They basically mine certain kinds of ore, which is called sepith, that was then used to power this like industrial orbal revolution. It's basically like electricity for us, but they also have a way of making it this like component that can help them cast different elemental spells. You've got, you know, the classic four: earth, water, air, and fire, but then there are also higher elements called mirage, time, and space. So that is where your magic comes into play. Different characters have different orbment setups. You get orbment and, you know, slot it in however you want in order to get the spells that you want. It's a little bit confusing when you're brand new to it, but eventually it makes like a ton of sense. It's just a little intimidating at first because there's a lot of customizability in the first games as far as orbment's concerned, because you have to use certain kinds of combinations to get the spells that you want. And the game does have like a reference guide in the back of your like bracer journal that's like, if you want to get this spell, you'll need this amount of these sepith types. Like you'll need 5 green and 1 red, or 5 wind and 1 fire, you know? So that's kind of how that's handled. Every character, as far as their physical abilities go, has their own weapon of choice. So you don't get to pick their physical capabilities so much. So for instance, Estelle uses a staff, which is what Cassius uses. Joshua uses like twin daggers or like dual blades, whatever you want to call them. They're small. He's much more like rogue-like, you know, sneaky kind of type. There is Skara, who uses a whip. There's another bracer called Agate that you'll meet, and he just uses this giant fucking sword. He's just got a big sword. That's his whole thing. As you meet more bracers and more people, you'll see all kinds of weapons. There's a bard-like character who's one of the best characters in the entire series, honestly. He's so good. His name's Olivier, I'm not sure, honestly. He uses an orbal gun, so, you know, he's really just kind of a bard, honestly. And you can kind of tell right away what characters are going to be better off for orbal arts and magic as opposed to like physical damage. So when I played, I heavily relied on him as an orbal arts dealer, magic damage, that kind of stuff. And I should also note that first chapter and second chapter were actually initially intended to be one game, but it was so long that the developers were like, we can't make this one game, it's too long. And instead of, you know, like cutting corners or trimming it down, they were like, we're just gonna make it 2 games. Because it is so story dependent and story heavy that to have taken much out of it might have really, you know, ruined it if they weren't careful, at least. So I know I just spent like a ton of time talking about the game itself, but I mean, there are 3 games in this series. Just a quick side note on the third. It's not called, you know, third chapter. It's called the third because while it is still the same characters, you are using a different leader. It is a different main protagonist, one that is known, but different. It's not Estelle and Joshua primarily anymore. It's also in kind of a different setting, and it's more of a segue between Trails in the Sky and Trails to Azure, because it goes into a lot of like, well, this is where everybody is. And it's also a lot of lore. It's a lot of backstory. It's a lot of world building again, but specifically more generalized rather than just being in Liberal. They're kind of hitting points in every part of Zemuria, and you're also getting a lot of specific character-related stories. Not so much presented by the characters themselves, but by documents that you find or unlock as you're going through 3rd chapter. It is a totally different setting, one that discusses more of the, I don't know if you want to call it religious aspect of Zemuria, but just like really quickly, there's a church in Zemuria. So there's this goddess that they worship, and she bestows upon mankind these treasures or relics that are known as septarians. There's one for each different type of element, including the higher elements that we talked about earlier. And eventually, her giving these gifts to mankind causes something called the Great Collapse in Zemurian history, and literally no one knows anything prior to the Great Collapse because it was so long ago. I think it was like 1200 years ago. But these septarians are, you know, supposedly still out in the world. But 3rd chapter does talk about that a little bit more in a way. It comes up definitely in 2nd and 1st chapter, but I would say 3rd chapter introduces it a little bit further. Like these grand relics, basically. I should also mention the goddess's name is Aidios, which, if you're a Spanish speaker like me, just kind of sounds like someone saying "Ay Dios," but it's Aidios or Adios or however you want to say it. I always say it in my mind as "Ay Dios," like "Oh God." So that is, you know, the plot and setting in a nutshell. It didn't seem like a nutshell. It felt like forever. I know it was a long explanation. But as far as, you know, my opinion of the gameplay, it's a little old. Obviously, it came out in the early 2000s, and originally it was, you know, primarily used on the PSP and PS Vita, although it was released for the computer. But I think it was like pre-Steam even, so it's a little clunky is what I'm getting at, but it's still a lot of fun. Don't let that, you know, dissuade you from anything. Say 1st chapter focuses a lot more on character introduction, world building, and minor plot points, while 2nd chapter focuses a lot on plot climax and resolution. Not to say that there isn't like a big plot and climax and resolution in 1st chapter, it's just you've kind of dealt with the smaller fire, and now there's a bigger fire in 2nd chapter that you've got to attend to that has kind of been brewing in 1st chapter this whole time. Honestly, my overall opinion, I started playing these games during quarantine, and it was a godsend. I love these games. It's probably my favorite game series. Just overall, The Legend of Heroes is probably one of my favorite game series of all time, if not my favorite. I love it so much. I want everyone who is even remotely interested in JRPGs to play it. That's how much I like it. I mean, if you've been around for my videos, then you know, like, I like story, I like lore, and this is, like, all of it. Like, this game has every single anime trope that you can think of rolled into a couple of games. Like, literally all of them. Different genres of anime, even. It's insane. The character development in Estelle Bright is also, like, A+ in my opinion. She goes from being a very immature child who just wants to smack things with her rod to, you know, a full-fledged bracer who's gone through a lot of shit. You know, she's just this teenager who, you know, was just ready to smack things with her staff and just ready to fight all the time, and she turns into this, like, well-developed character who's seen a lot of shit, who's gone through a lot of shit in her travels in the 1st and 2nd chapter, and is just a more mature person because of that. She is still the embodiment of, like, sunshine and, like, goodness in people. Like, that's her whole thing. Like, her name is literally Estelle Bright, Star Bright, if you want to get, like, really technical with it, but she's just, like, such a well-meaning good person. Yeah, that's kind of why I chose, like, a lot of yellow for my eye color today, was because she's just so bright. I don't really have anything else to say other than that. Like, that's just what it is. The characters are all really interesting. I am super invested right away with, you know, Estelle and Joshua, what's going on there. You kind of learn more about Joshua's past as you're going through the game because, you know, he's introduced as this wounded boy that Cassius brought home and was pretty sassy at first. But you find out very quickly, like, what his backstory is once you start getting into second chapter, what his whole deal was, the trauma that he went through before meeting Cassius and Estelle, and how Estelle kind of helped, I don't know, like heal his wounds, his mental wounds, if you want to call it that. There is a weird thing in the game where Estelle is very much in first chapter like, we're siblings, you're my adopted brother, like, we're brother and sister, I'm your sister. And it's very, like, weird because the game makes a big point of it, but if they didn't, then it would make more sense when Estelle is kind of like, oh, I guess, you know, we're technically not related. He's only been in my life for 5 years. And maybe I have feelings for him, because Joshua very obviously has feelings for Estelle, but he's more mature than her just right off the bat. So, you know, he's better at handling it than she is in second chapter when she kind of comes to terms with this. But it's this weird thing that the game wants to make a point of, like, they're siblings. They're not really siblings. And it's this weird switch. It's not my favorite part of the game by any means. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it is with anime and those tropes. I'm not going to comment on it. It's weird. Okay, there's my comment. I don't like it. But, you know, who does, I guess. But whatever. Anyways, that aside, it really is well developed. The characters are super interesting. You can get really invested if you're like me, with, like, character development and plot and what's happening, you know, like what's happening with this character and where are they gonna go. But anyways, it's a really good game. If you like JRPGs, please check it out. It is on Steam and it is incredibly cheap because it is so old. I love to spread the good word of Trails in the Sky and Legend of Heroes in general because it's kind of a hidden gem. Not many people know about it, but it is so good. So if you like JRPGs, if you like plot and characters and just like heavy lore, please try it. And let me know what you think of it. Let me know what you thought of the video and the makeup look that I did kind of around Estelle Bright and Trails in the Sky. But otherwise, that's pretty much all I have for you today. I hope you have a great remainder of your day or evening ahead of you, and thanks for joining me. I will see you next time. Bye!